Welcome to Lesson 3, Life is Tough. Last week we talked about our negative choices, about lies we've listened to and internalized. And it's not just women who've made negative choices, but all of mankind. And as a result of that, the Garden of Eden is gone. The world, our environment, is not a pleasant place. In fact, it's downright dangerous. And we must guide ourselves and our families through it. You know, the perfection that God created in the Garden of Eden is gone, and we are challenged in ways that were not a part of His original plan. We must guide ourselves and our families through a world that has predators, abusers, and those who attempt to dominate us. It's not safe. Values, standards, and ethics are often exchanged for what seems right at the moment. Let's look at Genesis 19, 1 through 8, and Judges 19, 1 through 27. They both tell a similar story. The story of individuals, in one case, two angels that looked like men, and in the other, a Levite and his concubine, coming into a town at the end of the day. They were waiting in the square, and finally, everyone was inhospitable, and finally, someone at the end of the day came and said, "Come and stay in my house." And he was a man from their home area. And that night, the house was stormed by men in the city, men who were in complete depravity, beating on the door and yelling, "Send out those men because we want to have sex with them." And in one case, when it was the concubine, not the angels, a woman was sacrificed and died that night from the abuse that she suffered. And it's because instead of sending out the men, the concubine was pushed out to let the mob have at her. And you know, in the other case with the angels that looked like two men, they escaped the city with Lot and his wife and daughters. And although they got out of the city and up to the mountains, after Lot's wife passed away because she became a pillar of salt, his daughters stooped to depravity and had incest with him, got him drunk, their father, and had incest with him. I hate these passages. In fact, I tend to read right through the Bible, one book after another, and I've just been in Genesis and Exodus, and one of these stories was there. And when I got to it, it was like, I don't want to read this again. I can't make sense of this. I don't even understand why this is in the Bible. It's so depraved. But you know, similar horrors are happening today. In our nation and around the world, our culture is truly a mess. And we sit around sometimes and we criticize it. Our culture is a mess. Someone should do something about it. And we should be the ones doing something about it. You know, sometimes I think, I don't mean to be pointing fingers at churches, but some churches seem to me to be like bunkers where people go, Christians go for just to sort of worship amongst themselves, and they aren't really solving the problems of anything. And we sort of seek comfort there from the depravity of the world. A friend from high school has just switched what she was doing, and she and her husband are now working in a ministry that is to free children from sex slavery across the world. And there's a woman that's doing something about it. So what are we doing? What am I doing? That's the question. Are we working to purge the evil from among us? C, the world defines womanhood through the lens of the media, which diminishes the value of who a woman is and God's purpose for her life. And D, the world objectifies a woman's femininity based on her physical attributes. Even in Esther, if you read the book of Esther, that's disturbing to me too. I mean, Esther was great and she stepped up and she became a hero and did the right thing, but she was pulled in because she was gorgeous. And had she not been so beautiful, she wouldn't have been chosen. And she was one of many wives of this king. It's just another way that says, you know, women have been objectified really for centuries, and we're looked at for our physical attributes rather than who we are as women of God. I'm somewhat grateful in this nation in that I work in the business world, and maybe I'm just working in a company where we really do follow the law, but there are laws that, for the most part, protect women in the workplace against this sort of behavior, where they are objectified because of their physical attributes. And for that, I'm grateful. But really, you just go to the grocery store and you look at the front of magazines and what's on TV and pornography, and it's rampant. Women are objectified. Deanna?
Well, some of the other things that I think our world has inherited as a result of the garden being gone and Adam and Eve being banished and they're left to fend for themselves on their own is a world that supports a series of lies that consistently undermine God's plan. So some of the lies that we are told are, and these are some very interesting ones, I had to check myself when I was going through this. Number one is sin. Sin is defined as a series of specific actions. So we can challenge ourselves, ladies, versus the thought that it's a pervasive self-destructive force that uses our judgment of others as a distraction. In other words, are we tempted to say, well, I don't drink, I don't smoke, so we start to list these actions as this is the way that I'm going to measure my sin of whether I'm good or not, instead of understanding it is a force. As a matter of fact, it's that force that causes us to judge sin. We rank it as ones being the worst and other ones being not so bad. But that entire judgmental nature is actually a lie. The sin that we have come up with is, I think I'm better, when all of us, the entire creation, groans because of sin. Another lie is believing that a person's personal wealth, and actually I like to use too, worth in that, so interchanging it. A person's personal wealth or worth is defined by status, money, style, and possessions. And I'm actually going to read a passage to you. It's one of my favorite passages. It is when, if you know a little bit of Bible history, if you don't know too much of it, I can bring you up to speed. But the nation of Israel didn't have a ruler after Moses died and Joshua. And then God gave them a series of judges to rule over them. And then after the period of judges, prophets came along. And the first prophet was Samuel. And even then, the nation of Israel raised their fists and said, we want a king. We are not happy with just having a prophet. We want to be like the nations around us. They weren't happy with being set apart. So Samuel said, okay, I'll anoint you a king. And Samuel goes and he finds Saul. Now, from what the Bible says, Saul was very tall and very stately. He was a head or more taller than anyone else around. So he looked like a king. So, okay, he had the style of a king. He looked very kingly. And they anointed, and Samuel anointed him. and to the detriment of the nation discovered that he should not have. Probably, actually, God told him to anoint, but then he realized what God is after. And so we're going to expose this lie, and I like exposing a lie by sharing a truth. So here's one of the truths. As we read this, Samuel anoints David. So Saul becomes a man who does not honor God, regardless of how good he looked. He didn't honor God. But we discover that David is going to be a man that does. Here is the passage, and it is from 1 Samuel 16, 6 to 11. When they arrived, this is Samuel, he's going now to anoint David as a king. Samuel saw Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. David had 7 older brothers, and Eliab was one of the oldest. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height. See, remember, they considered Saul's appearance and his height, and it wasn't what God was looking for. For I have rejected Eliab. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So then Jesse goes down the long line of brothers and says, is it this one? And the Lord says, no, I have not picked this one. Then there's one, Samuel says, are these all the sons you have? And Jesse says, they're still the youngest, but he's tending the sheep. Like, really, he doesn't have much status in our family. He's out there, But Samuel said, bring him in. The Lord said, rise and anoint him. He is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And I like to go actually to Acts, where we find in Acts 13:22, a continuation of the story. After removing Saul, he made David their king. God testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. I like that because God showed us it wasn't appearance, it wasn't how someone looked, it wasn't all that he owned or even his job title. It was where his heart was. And our world tells us the lie of our possessions, our status, our money is what matters and what makes us worth something. When God says, if you would look at your heart, I will find you worthy if your heart is after me. The third lie that we tend to kind of find ourselves into, and it's because the world paints us that people who are like us are more trustworthy than people who are different. Well, in God's economy, there are no cliques. And I think sometimes I was growing up in high school and in junior high, and it mattered where we belonged, if we were the athlete or the musician. And even our status today in the world, we may find ourselves tending to, where do I belong? You know what? We might actually find ourselves belonging in a place where we're not like anybody else, like missionaries tend to be. And we need to understand that that is a lie, and that if we just align ourselves with God, we'll understand we don't always have to be with people who are the same. The next thing that the world seems to hand us is the idea that what is seen is more important than what is not seen. So what we do is we buy into the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh. And so we look at all the things around us, and we become very much either afraid, or we put our hope in all the things that we can touch, see, and feel, and we forget there's a spirit world. And the spirit world is even more real than these physical things, because God says in the end days, heaven and earth will pass away. So all the things that we're sitting on and that we can touch won't be there. So we can't always rely on those things. And the other thing that the world tells us that we've inherited from the fall in the garden is any means of achieving a goal is justified. Well, I'll tell you, I have seen people climb the corporate ladder and in their pursuit of achieving a goal have ruined relationships, messed up marriages, perhaps done things that they never dreamed that they would do. It's not worth selling our soul just because we need to hold on to something that is going to actually slip from our grasp anyway. The other thing, too, that we tend to hold on to is I'm more important than you are. So we think, okay, I'm going to step on you to get ahead. Or what about my way? When really it's God's way. Or perhaps even deferring to a friend or deferring to a spouse. But in our nature, something rises up and that pride comes, and we end up playing the I, me game. The last thing, too, I think that we tend to focus on is that Christians, we feel that we're the only group of people with a faith system. And sometimes I did not grow up in the church. And so the time that I actually had a relationship with God, I was in junior high or high school, and I went to a place where it was fairly Christian. And so I did think that, oh, well, we read the Bible, no one else reads the Bible or has a Bible or has a belief system besides. But that's a very narrow and ignorant view of looking at world religion. And it also causes us to not have a heart of compassion for people who are different. Another thing that the world has given us as a result of the fall and falling away and being banished from the garden is it gives women a status that is viewed as second class, and it treats them in an inferior manner. And so I think as women, if we felt that we were being treated in an equal way, we wouldn't feel the need to climb the corporate ladder or to be so competitive to prove to ourselves that we're important. Another thing that Ruthie touched on as well is the thing that we know in the media and all what we can see with our eyes is that sex sells. And it's a disappointment because a lot of women have bought into that and have thought that, well, depending on how I look and if I can be a little sensual, then I'm going to matter a little bit more. And that's not the truth. Unfortunately, we've inherited a world that lacks the financial resources to take care of everyone. My husband and I went on a journey through our financial mishaps and mistakes. We ended up adding on a lot of debt pretty early on. Our credit was good, and the credit card companies were sending us things shortly after college, and actually we graduated from college with very little debt, and so we were woo-hoo. But then we realized we fell right into that trap. And so we became guilty of even what our world was guilty of. We didn't have the resources to even take care of ourselves. We just built up a lot of debt. And fortunately, we got in touch with a financial planner, a very godly man who got us back on track. And now we can be generous with our resources because we learned a very valuable lesson. Our world ridicules and devalues and treats the Christian faith as irrelevant. And I'm worried that our world is going to be in big trouble. I think that across the globe, but now, just recently in our country, you can see the onset of mocking. You can see the onset of the Christian faith being less than or just scooped under the rug, or the magnification is on it as being intolerant. And it makes me sad. However, it comes in line with what we've inherited as a result of the fall. Christians, the Bible, God, the Father, the nuclear family is all becoming irrelevant, and other things are taking its place, and it is something very sobering. Another burden that we tend to share now that our world is ailing is that bureaucracies exist, paperwork, procedures. The person no longer matters anymore. Instead, what matters is whether someone is going to get sued or whether things are done the right way. And we've forgotten those who are hurting. We've forgotten those who need us the most. And they get caught in the system. Children without families get caught in the system. Widows who don't have as much get caught in the system. Those who are disabled get caught in the system. And it's unfortunate that we can't love and minister to them the way they need us to because there's so much red tape in our world today. So what else do we have in store? Natural disasters. When I turn on the news, I just get so anxious over what I'm going to see next. Sometimes we just need to understand that God's word is true. When he says a new heaven and new earth is coming, our very creation groans in pain. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing things that aren't right with our climate and with things that are happening all around us. And God told us in the beginning that that's what would happen. It's not comforting, it's scary. I take comfort in the fact that even though God's word is hard, just as Ruthie mentioned, it is true. And if I can stand on his truth, knowing that God is never going to change, then I know he also is going to take care of me. He's going to love us, and he's going to have a plan, a greater plan for all of this that has taken place. Our world is in a lot of trouble. So I want to finish with just this point. We see, my husband and I, as we work with children, a world that encourages a self-centered mentality where common courtesies are put aside. And as a parent, we try to teach our children common courtesies. We also have students that are in our lives who come from a very mean world. And so they've learned to survive being mean. And what results is another generation of children raised to not be considerate of other people, but they're really learning to survive.
So I'm here to give you more discouraging news about the world. The world is an ugly, very difficult place. We in the world must deal with the debilitating effects of disease which shorten and limit a person's ability to function. And we saw this in the New Testament when Jesus was here on earth. He touched people and healed them. People have been born with debilitating problems for years and years. But when it's someone in your family, it really impacts your life greatly. And of course, the people around you. And then our world is ugly and ridiculous and gives us other problems like food that tastes good but doesn't have much nutritional value. Well, let me show you an example. This apple is beautiful, isn't it? God creates the apple, gave us the know how to do that. But we've taken products. Is this food? These are little candy bars. And, oh, it looks good, doesn't it? Look at that caramel. And but let me show you that this is 100 calories. And one of these is 50. So this is 100 versus 100. But that's not the bottom line. The bottom line is that this has value and nutritional value and vitamins and nutrients. And this has basically nothing. But this is what our children want. This is what I want. And so that's definitely something that is wrong with our world. Another thing that's wrong with our world that it just puts this in our lives is the ongoing source of, it is an ongoing source of unpredictable accidents that harm others. How many people do you know that have been in some sort of a drunk driver accident? My prayer partner that I've prayed with for 16 years now, when we were in high school together, we got into college then, and she was going to go on a short-term missions trip with me and a group of people, and she actually was hit by a car, a drunk driver, about 3 days before we left and did not make the trip. And to this day has brain trauma and from the injury cannot do the things that I can do. We still pray together and it's still an amazing relationship, but things like that happen in our world. Just yesterday, I was driving, listening to the news, and I heard that a student, a boy, had stabbed his girlfriend at school because she wasn't delivering. We're talking, was it junior high or high school? It's just ridiculous. But that's what's going on in our world today. Also, our world creates legitimate concerns regarding our children. Now, I'm an elementary school teacher. As an elementary school teacher, for years teaching, I realized that our children have been forced to grow up too quickly. They've been forced into a world of adulthood that is contaminating them and is not allowing them to be children. And there's just many problems. Here's just a few. Education is being divorced from spirituality. And so in the public schools particularly, there is less and less of a connection and an application of spirituality to our lives. And what is spirituality is really a lot of paganism and spirit ideas that have nothing to do with the real God and the real truth. Something else that is happening with our children is there's bullying and violence, just as that boy who stabbed his girlfriend. We also have the education of special needs children that we as parents have to be very, very, very alert and attuned to. It has to be a priority and is something that we have to fight for. And then addiction is prevalent for children, and alcohol and drugs, many children find in their own home, and then it's being offered at school. It was offered when I was going to school, and that was years ago. There was smoke in the girls' bathroom, and But nowadays, we have other addictive kind of things too. We've got all of the technology. We've got addictions to social media. We've got addictions to gaming. We've got addictions to all kinds of things. And our world also makes us experience unexpected loss on a daily basis. And loss causes grief, and it just compounds the trouble that we have in our world. So Tammy, take it from here.
All right. Ladies, are you ready for some good news? Because I am. It's been pretty heavy here. So we're going to close out today looking at the promises of God, the hope, the peace, the joy that we can live daily when we're in God's Word and what He offers to us. When we live in a less than ideal environment on a daily basis, and as we've heard, we do, an ideal God is a requirement. Now, that's not a suggestion, it is a necessity. So despite all the difficulties mentioned above, God tells us a number of things. Now, we're going to go through some verses here, and I've actually asked these ladies to jump in with some of their own verses just to equip you with where you can turn when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling like you need encouragement and lift up. So here we go. He will never desert you. Now, this is found in Deuteronomy 31, verse 6. These words are being given to Joshua as he's taking over the helm. For Moses, of all people, he's a little fearful. And God is telling Joshua, do not be discouraged because I will always be with you. Well, guess what? That same promise that he gave to Joshua is for us today. So don't be discouraged because God is with you. In Romans, Paul writes many encouraging things, talks about how nothing can separate us from the love of God. That's Romans 8:38. I'm not going to read that verse, but it just talks about how death nor life, nothing can separate us from God's love. Then also in Romans 8:28, that God works things for our good. He works all things for our good. He wants good for us. Now, it doesn't mean that everything in our life is going to be rosy, all right? But it does mean that in His plan, it is all part of His plan for us to experience good. Now, I'm listing verses. You don't need to hear lists from me. Let's turn to some other folks. Ruthie, give us a verse or two that you've turned to over the years that has really encouraged you.
Well, I was talking about the depravity of the world earlier, and I work in a company where we have, several hundred therapists who deal with all sorts of abuse of their clients, and they're counseling them, and just really difficult cases. And these therapists do get discouraged. And then on top of that, there's all sorts of regulations that they have to follow. They have a lot of clinical documentation, treatment plans due on a certain time. And so, they really want to focus on the client who's in pain, but the state and government require a lot of other things. And so it was a point in time where our therapists were really struggling with negativity. And I felt that God gave me a task, and that was after I read the book of Nehemiah. And the task was to go back and rebuild and sort of get all of them involved in rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And I was afraid because it's hard to confront or go up against. I mean, what do you do and say to several hundred therapists when you really don't have good news because the regulations haven't changed or any of that? But we came up with a plan to go out and make, I think there were 8 different speeches in the span of 1 week. And I don't have an easy time speaking anyway. And so the content was scary, and I felt that God had given it to me. But the mornings, the 2 mornings right before I was going to the first event, I was reading in Isaiah by then, because from Nehemiah to Isaiah, we were busy coming up with what it was we were going to do, and it turned out to be quite a project, which was going to involve getting them interested in quality measures so that they could see how they could get better in different ways to excite them about becoming better therapists, which then meant they were giving better treatment to the client. So that was the message to deliver. Now, these are cynical therapists, many of them sarcastic therapists, a lot of them way smarter than I am, and I was scared to deliver the message. And God gave me this, and it's no different than the hope that you've been reading for any circumstance. But one morning, oh, that's a different story. Let me get back to this story. One morning I read, "I will go before you, and I will level the mountains." And I just went, wow. He will. He will. I know he told me to do this. He will. And the next day, no, actually, I think I read this the same day. I was so excited, I just kept on reading. And this one was, "For I am the Lord, your God, who churns up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord Almighty is his name. I have put my words in your mouth and covered you with the shadow of my hand."
Yeah. And that's from Isaiah 50. Yeah. Great passage.
That's great.
All right. Nancy, how about you?
Well, one of my unexpected little gems that nobody talks about, Acts 17:35 or 17:27. No, but this is what it says. Acts 17:27, God did this so that men would seek him. Let me go back to verse 26. From one man, God made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he, God, determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. That tells me that God knows where I'm going to live. He knows where I lived, a house ago or 2 houses ago or 3 houses ago. I can remember in Bethlehem, when Rich and I lived in Bethlehem, we lived at 782 Washington Avenue. You can remember that. But I can't remember the RD number 3 something on Daisy Lane in Fleetwood that came after that, because it didn't have this neat little jingle. But God knows. And the thing is, God knows where I'm going to live next, and I don't have to worry about it because it's already there. It's already in the plan. And even though I get to make decisions, God is in the details. And I've used this many times in teaching, but a year and a half ago when I lost my husband and my home and my ministry, it was tough all at once. January 1, gone. And God moved me into a little house at 2302 Middle Green Court. And Becky, my daughter, said about a month later, Mom, God really loves you because 2302 Middle Green, I think, should stand for or be linked with Psalm 23, verse 2, that says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. And God has continued to be that faithful. And he knows the exact place that I will live now and in the future. And interesting, I'd taught that for years, and suddenly it was right there. So even in a horrible world, God's got us covered.
He does. Okay.
I'm going to add to it.
Deanna.
We're just celebrating here who God is.
Yeah.
So this I like because it gives me confidence in the fact that God's got this. Hebrews 12:28 says this, "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe." What I like about that is that he knows that the kingdom, or we can rest in the fact that his kingdom is not going to be shaken.
That's right.
He's not surprised. He wasn't surprised during the Great Depression. He wasn't surprised during the fall of Rome. He wasn't surprised when the temple in Jerusalem fell, and he won't be surprised when it gets rebuilt again. He is never surprised by that, but we often are. If we can just stand on his word, and you ladies, we've all been doing this today, and it's been so exciting, and seeing that, you know what, he is not shaken.
Right.
He's not surprised by our mistakes. He wants to reconcile us. He wants to reconcile our world, and he will do it. But none of this stuff in between is going to shake him.
Amen.
And I have confidence in a God. I can follow a God like that.
I love it. Well, the world throws a lot at us. I like to go right to Jesus' words. So I'm going to read for you Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30. This is Jesus speaking. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I take comfort in that. A few more verses. John 14:27. Jesus again is speaking, saying that he's going to leave his peace with us. Another verse. Philippians. Philippians is an amazing book that offers a lot of comfort. But we're going to just hone in today on Philippians 4:19, where God's telling us that he will meet all of our needs. And then Isaiah 40:29, actually there's several verses right around that, talks about God giving us strength, that he never grows weary, and that he will empower and strengthen us, and that we can soar like we are on eagle's wings. And then Jeremiah 29:11, and I am going to read that because this is an incredible, incredible verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. That's an incredible, incredible verse. Well, I hope you're encouraged. We've learned in this last section with all of us that there's really what I want to call a great exchange. God is saying, give me your worries, give me your burdens, and in exchange for that, I'm going to give you my peace, joy, hope. I'm going to encourage you. Listen, ladies, God is not a distant deity. He did not create us and then leave us to figure things out for ourselves. He is always with us. Our lives are part of his plan. Nothing that happens to you is a surprise to God. He has got you covered. We've heard that on all of these verses. So all you need to do is that great exchange. Give him your worries. Give him your situation, and he will fill you right back up with hope, peace, and encouragement. That's today's lesson. Now, next week, we'll talk about the fact that we often make a tough life even tougher through our own imperfections. This makes matters worse in an already difficult life. No worries, though, because we can do that great exchange. We can overcome. Well, ladies, thanks for sharing. I really, so.